not. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 10 work session of the Ann Arbor City Council, where we will be regaled with the wonders of asset management. Mr. Hupy, would you care to kick things off?
As Mr. Yuppie comes to the podium,
Mr. Lazarus, would you care
and
to kick
he
things
and Ms. Prashant are here, I do want to call out the fact that our public services staff are leaders in the state in terms of asset management, and the work that they're doing will be broadly emulated by others. So what you're about to see is somewhat cutting edge and shows the degree of diligence that Mr. Yuppie and team pay attention to with the assets they're entrusted with.
Thank you. With that flowery introduction, I am Craig Hupy. I am the Public Services Area Administrator. And what Mr. Lazarus says about us being leaders, as you folks have been engaged on the road plans and the road ratings that we've done and the management of the road that we've done, that has been recognized. And MDOT has asked us at various times to present to other organizations. And at one point, they flew Nick Hutchinson up to the UP to present to the UP Road Group. Asset management is a part of public services. Most of the activities reside within systems planning, and asset management is understanding what you own, where it's located, what its condition is, developing a plan for managing its condition, and it's for its replacement or rehab, which leads to the CIP. And that is very briefly about 3 or 4 of the slides that Marty will share with you. Marty Prashant is Chief of Staff at Public Services, and she is the titular head of systems planning. So she will regale us with the asset management plans.
Thank you. Regale, I'm not sure I'll regale you, but I'll do my very best. I'll do my very best. As Craig indicated, we are here this evening to discuss our asset management efforts with a focus on the assets and the systems maintained by the public services area. Although asset management is a responsibility of the systems planning unit, asset management is an interactive, long-term, and collaborative effort undertaken by several staff members of the public services area. In addition to Craig and myself, we have our team that consists of our plant managers, Brian Steglitz of the water treatment plant, Earl Kenzie of the wastewater treatment plant, our chief engineer, Nick Hutchinson, and also our public works staff that includes Molly Maciejewski, our public works manager, and our public works engineer, Chris Ellenboss. And then our systems planning team, which includes 2 engineers, Troy Boffman and Deb Goslin. And Deb is also responsible for the resulting CIP, which is fed by our asset management plans. And then finally, our water quality manager, Jennifer Lawson, who I have to give credit to, who assisted me in this presentation for this evening. We'll begin this evening with an overview of what we'll be covering. First of all, explaining to you what asset management is, the 10 steps that we use to develop an asset management plan, and then we'll take a few moments to update you on the state of our efforts in public services, which includes the asset categories of pavement and roads, bridges, the urban forest, our sanitary sewer system, the stormwater system, the drinking water distribution system, as well as the drinking water treatment plant and the wastewater plant, and finally streetlights. And then on the tail end, we'll talk a little bit about the pavement asset management plan at the airport, as well as our city facilities and buildings. Oops. You'll notice that some of the asset categories are marked with the blue asterisk that will indicate to you that we have some regulatory requirement or a component of the plan. So first of all, what is asset management? It's a systematic process of deploying, operating, maintaining, and upgrading and disposing of assets cost effectively. It's a mechanism we use to plan for and manage construction and natural infrastructure within the city to meet current and future demands of our community. So the question might be, why do we do asset management other than, in some cases, we are required to do so? We do it to establish and reach goals for each asset system, to manage and sustain the performance of each system. It also allows us to manage our assets, God bless you, effectively, saving time and money, avoiding unnecessary use of resources. And also, it's a key component and an integral part of the city's strategic plan by ensuring financial health and delivering exceptional service, as well as it's necessary to meet our sustainability action plan goals of maintaining and managing a sustainable systems. In addition to our water treatment plant and our wastewater plant, this graphic represents the asset groups that are managed by public services. So you'll see we start with the street trees in the right-of-way, which we manage approximately 45,000 trees. The roads, we have approximately 200 center line miles of local roads and 100 center line miles of major roads, which converts to about 433 lane miles of local and 353 of major. We have the sanitary sewer plant, as well as 365 miles of pipe, over 10,000 manholes, and 8 lift stations that are managed by the water treatment or wastewater treatment plant. For drinking water, in addition to the plant, we have 5 miles of pipe, over 3,000 hydrants, and over 7,000 valves in the system. On stormwater, we have 293 miles of pipe, 155 stream crossings, over 15,000 inlets and catch basins, and 22 city-owned ponds that we're responsible for maintaining, as well as overseeing 660 privately owned ponds. And then finally, streetlights. We have approximately 2,454 city-owned streetlights, and we continue to add them each year. And as well, DTE owns approximately 5,110 streetlights within the city. And although we don't maintain them, we often get involved in maintenance there. Next, we're moving on to the 10 steps that we undertake when we're developing an asset management plan. It's not uncommon for larger systems to span 3 to 4 years. So our urban forestry plan was a 4-year plan that involved significant public engagement. And currently, we are well underway for stormwater and sanitary, and we just are approaching a 3-year mark there. So it's not uncommon for these plans to span years. The first step in the plan is to develop the asset registry or collect the inventory of assets. So depending on the size of the asset group that you're dealing with, this can be a considerable amount of time spent on this step. Basically, it's a record that clearly identifies the assets of that particular business. The second step, to assess performance failure modes, is basically the condition assessment of each of the assets that you're listing. In this step, we're looking at the condition, the age, the material, the usage. The most common way to perform this step is physical inventory or visual, and we often use video and TVing services for this step. The third step is determining the residual life of the assets. We use the information that we gathered in the first 2 steps to input into a software. So depending on the system that we're using, for instance, for the roads, we use RoadSoft, and for sanitary, storm, and streetlights, we're currently using Ascetic. So we plug all this information into the system, and it helps us determine the residual life of the assets. The 4th step is determining the life cycle or replacement costs. Again, we're using historic data, sometimes benchmark data, and then public works maintenance data to inform us on the life cycle costs and at the time where it's appropriate to replace. The 5th step can often be a totally separate study or a project. Like in water and stormwater, we had separate projects that set target levels of level of service. This is the step that we would involve public engagement in these projects. We look at things in this step like regulatory requirements, industry standards, level of service established by studies previously conducted, and council and public's desired level of service. Number 6 is determine the business risk, or how critical that infrastructure is. So as we move through asset management, we look at each asset to determine what would happen if that particular asset failed. So in those cases where you have a critical piece of infrastructure, those are required to be prioritized higher in our prioritization of funding for investment. Number 7, optimize O&M investment, operations and maintenance. So you may be familiar with this step in our road asset management plan, where the software determines the right fix at the right time. For streetlights, when do you invest in painting poles as opposed to replacing poles to prolong the life of the pole itself? We also then, in step 8, optimize capital investment. And basically, this is the step where we determine how much money is appropriate to invest in the capital aspect of the asset group on an annual basis. So as we just moved through this step with streetlights, the plan indicated that we needed to fund approximately $530,000 annually in capital maintenance for streetlights to maintain them at the existing level. And then number 9, in my opinion, the most important part, of course, is determining a funding strategy. As a finance person, this is key in establishing an asset management plan. We have to figure out how we're going to pay for what we need to keep the assets in good condition. So we often use rate dollars to fund the utilities, and we use Act 51 and millages to fund the road work. So our plans have to involve either a rate strategy or prioritization of projects in order to complete an asset management plan. And the final step is to build the final plan, which develops the overall strategy to maintain the level of service as our community desires, and then obviously implementing the asset management plan, which then gets rolled into the CIP and our annual budget process. So our asset groups are in basically 3 different categories. One category is ones that are completed and we're actively managing. The next category are asset management plans that are under development and in process. And then the third group are those items that we have, although not officially embarked on an asset management plan, they're on our list and we're currently doing steps 1 and 2. So the groups that we're actively managing right now are pavement, urban forestry, drinking water, which includes both distribution and the plant, and bridges. Our pavement asset management plan, as you heard about, was required by MDOT and is managed by the Transportation Asset Management Council, and we're required to have a plan filed by October 1st of 2020. And the city actually submitted their plan in 2017. They rolled that plan out to City Council in a work session back in 2016, and as indicated, MDOT uses us as an example of how to do an asset management plan. Our current plan expires in January of 2020, so we're required to update it, and currently staff is working on developing that plan. The urban forest was the urban and community forest plan, and it was adopted by council in June of 2014. That plan was actually responsible for reestablishing a pruning cycle with the required funding, and as well as dealing with a backlog of tree removals. As the forestry canopy was devastated by emerald ash borer, we fell behind, so this planning document allowed us to have a plan to address that. Drinking water, we have already filed our asset management plan with the state as of December of 2017. It's currently under review by Eagle, so we're waiting to hear feedback on that. And then finally, bridges. As far as bridges goes, we actually did an in-house asset management plan there. And the reason that asset management plan was completed is because it was a necessary step as we apply for critical local bridge funding. So as we move on to roads, we'll discuss that asset category first as a plan we're actively managing. And as indicated in the upper right-hand corner of the year shows the effective date of the plan. And also in the lower right of each slide, you'll see the the tools or the software that the group is using to manage those asset management plans. So as far as pavement goes, we're using CityWork and RoadSoft, and we also use the Payzer system to rate the roads in the city. Our roads consist of 200 miles, again, of local and 100 miles of major centerline. Our pavement is predominantly asphalt. About 94% of our pavement is asphalt. The other 6% is concrete, brick, and some gravel roads. We fund the maintenance for roads either with local street, bridge, and sidewalk millage, Act 51, which is the weight and gas tax, which translates to the major and local streets funds. We also utilize the Washtenaw County Road and non-motorized path millage, as well as we seek federally funded sources through MDOT, most typically STPU funding. Our annual maintenance budget for pavement and roads is around $32 million with all those funding sources combined. Currently, we've implemented the plan, which you may recall changed our method of operation to invest more in capital maintenance as opposed to reconstruction. The challenges that we'll see is really funding priorities. What is it we want to prioritize? And sometimes it doesn't align with the asset management plan because we have other infrastructure needs. We also have to align the pavement and roads with utility replacements. So we have to align the funding sources there, which sometimes can be challenging. We also have a limited staff capacity, as well as we have found ourselves recently bumping up against contractor capacity. There are a few contractors who do this type of work, and as you can imagine, as funding gets freed up, they are busy and they book up quite early. As a result of this plan, we established a goal to increase our Payzer rating in the road system from 7 or greater for 80% of the streets in 10 years, which is by approximately 2026. And again, the Payzer is a pavement surface evaluation, which MDOT has adopted. So 10 is in excellent shape and 1 is failure. So we want everything at 7 or above, or 80% of everything to be 7 or above by 2026. Currently, we're about 50% of our roads are good or better. So we have pictures. The top left, I'm sure everyone's familiar with our famous pothole. So that's just an example of pavement asset management programs that will address our issues with pothole. In this top center, you'll see a contractor crew doing a capital preventive maintenance treatment called crack sealing. So they're filling cracks with a liquid rubber substance. On the top right, you'll see a recently resurfaced road that addresses the crosswalk, refreshed the pavement marking lines, and added the curb ramps. On the left, a reconstruction project. And on the far bottom, again, is a recognition of our pavement asset management plan by the Transportation Asset Management Council, MDOT. Nick proudly displays this award, so I'm sure if you're interested in seeing it, he'll be glad to share it with you. Our next plan that we're actively managing is the urban forestry plan. We maintain approximately 45,000 trees within the city right-of-way. Trees are funded via the Stormwater Fund and are dependent on stormwater rates paid by our customers. We fund trees out of stormwater because trees are an asset to the stormwater system as they reduce runoff to the system, therefore reduce the need for capital investment in the collection system. Our annual budget for tree maintenance is approximately $2.6 million. We're currently in the status of implementing the recommendation. Number 1, as I mentioned, a proactive tree maintenance program, including pruning. We're on a 10-year cycle. We're currently in year 2 of that cycle. We're in a 10-year cycle, so we'll be through the entire city in 10 years. But as our former forester set up, Carrie didn't necessarily do it. She hit areas that were in the most need. So she spread it out over the city, not necessarily in certain sections of the city. Again, another staffing capacity is one of the challenges we see as we maintain these 45,000 trees with approximately 8 staff members, 8 public works staff members and a supervisor with varying skill levels and experience. We supplement those efforts with contracted services when appropriate. Currently, Davy Tree Experts is handling our pruning cycle, our pruning contracted cycle. And again, some photos of our forestry group in action. On the top left is an example of planting, which occurs either in the spring or the fall. The center is pruning, which is a big activity during the winter months. And again, on the top right, you'll see some trimming actually happening that requires a bucket truck. Lower left is a picture of the crew. And then the lower center, you'll see, again, some trimming happening, but you'll also see the power lines there, so that staff has to be trained for line clearance. And then on the far right, planting again, with utilizing the city's equipment, it's called the Prentice, that they plant trees with. Finally, the next asset group that we're currently managing is our drinking water treatment plant. So the asset management plan that was submitted to the state of Michigan includes both the drinking water plant and the distribution as one plan, but we'll split them up here as far as topics goes, because they're slightly different. On the drinking water treatment plant, we have 22,000 assets. 250 of those are indicated as to be critical. We fund them, again, with water rates. We have approximately a $10.5 million annual budget. We are required under the Michigan Safe Drinking Act to have a plan on file by January 28th, and as I mentioned, we've submitted our plan as of December 2017. It's a requirement for communities serving more than 1,000 customers. At some point, we plan to take this information and load it into the new software we've used, but for right now, they're using a Mainsaver software. The water treatment plant is a 24/7 operation that is managed by 27 employees. And some photos that represent the water treatment plant. The upper left is just a nod to the laboratory services, which some folks don't realize all our lab services occur at the water treatment plant for both sanitary and sewer. The center top, again, is the Barton Dam. The top right is our water tower at Plymouth, and water towers are also managed and maintained by the water treatment plant. The lower left is an overview of the water treatment plant site, and you can see we don't have a whole lot of room there. And from what I understand, the front section there is where our reservoir is, so we can't really technically build over that. Again, in the center, just a nod to water quality. It's a very important component of what the water treatment plant is dealing with recently. We have, again, the gallery, and then the lower right is the Barton Pond. And now on to the drinking water distribution. For those 700 miles of pipe that we have, we manage that with approximately 14 staff and 1 supervisor. So they're maintaining 500 miles of pipe as well as the 3,000 hydrants, 7,400 valves. Again, funded via the water fund or water rates. Approximately a $4.9 million annual budget. The asset man has been completed and it's been submitted as mentioned. And at some point, we'll plan to incorporate this into our newly acquired aesthetic software once we get feedback from the state. And here is some photos of our crew doing some work. So in the upper left, you'll see crews installing new valves, which they use to turn on and off flow in the system. The upper right is a photo of a water main break. The lower left, hand excavating is often required. Then the lower center, just one of our manhole covers. And then on the lower right, hydrant flushing, which is a critical component of our asset management plan. We need to ensure that the hydrants are ready for when they're needed. The final plan that we're actively managing is our bridges plan. We have 14 bridges in the public right-of-way. We completed an in-house asset management plan in 2016. Again, it was created to accompany our request for critical bridge funding. And having an asset management plan improves our chances of getting selected for funding. Currently, funding for bridge maintenance is either funded from Act 51 or the street, bridge, and sidewalk millage, depending on what work is actually be completed. We have a biannual bridge inspection program that is funded from Act 51. We also have a little portion that's funded by the Sanitary Fund because there is a bridge that actually leads to the wastewater treatment plant. And then we inspect bridges for U of M and the DDA as well, so they will contribute their share to the project. Projects have ranged from $200,000 to $15 million. A challenge in this area is aging infrastructure. Next is just an example of some of the bridges that we deal with. Upper left, here on Parkway, Stadium over to the far right, Fuller, lower right. Just some photos for you to view. The next category are asset categories where we have plans that are under development. So as I mentioned, streetlights, stormwater, and sanitary are all occurring at this moment. The city facilities is managed by the facilities unit, and the wastewater treatment plant itself will do a separate asset management plan than the distribution system. So as we start with streetlights, again, we have over 2,400 city-owned streetlights in the system. We use a crew of approximately, they equates to about 2 full-time people from the signal crew to maintain those streetlights. Streetlights is funded via the general fund. In 2017, our public works engineer developed the asset management plan utilizing the new aesthetic software, which was acquired as part of the sanitary and stormwater asset management plan efforts. It was a good place to test the software because the asset category was on the smaller scale, so we learned how to use the software before we undertook the larger systems. Again, as I mentioned, that plan currently calls for $530,000 in annual capital investment. And as we add infrastructure to the system, we have to update the software in the plan. Again, challenges we have, staffing limitations, lack of resources and funding, and aging infrastructure. And these are some of the photos of our streetlights maintenance activities. On the far left, you'll see a decorative pole in the downtown area. And then the lower section, I think, is Craig's favorite picture because that shows you the deterioration of the bolts that hold the streetlights in place, which then resulted in the pole falling on the far right. So those bolts will rust and corrode and weaken, and the pole then goes over. So we now have a system in place where they have all been inspected, their condition is in a system, and we know which areas and which poles we should be addressing annually. The stormwater system, as I mentioned, the project is well underway. We are likely to be completed by November of this year. We started the project back in June of 2016, so again, long-term process. We are probably in step 9 at the moment. This effort is in coordination with the sanitary sewer system, distribution system. The stormwater system, we had some data from a level of service that was just recently completed back in May of 2018, which involved significant public engagement. So we had a lot of public engagement as part of this process. We are managing 293 miles of conveyance with 6 staff and 1 supervisor. The 22 miles of creeks and open channels, the inlets, and the detention ponds. Again, this is funded via stormwater rates with an annual budget of about $3.4 million. We're working on the final draft of the asset management plan and hope to have it completed by the end of the year. And we have incorporated some of those level of services recommendations in our annual budget as well as the CIP. So the top left, you'll see a typical maintenance problem. Those are tree roots that have invaded a pipe, which then causes overflows or backups or flooding. The top center is just a picture of the stormwater grate that shows you anything in the road will eventually end up in the Huron River, which you see on the lower left. The upper right is a water quality project, the Miller Creek Stream Bank Stabilization Project. The lower right is the Miller Street Rain Garden. Rain gardens and green infrastructure are now part of the Stormwater Asset Management Plan. And in the center, as part of the level of service study, what came back from our advisory committee was that we needed to do more public education. So that is a logo that we're using to educate our public on how they should be maintaining their stormwater infrastructure. Next up is our sanitary sewer system, and as I mentioned, we're currently under completing this process along with the stormwater system asset management plan. We have a regulatory requirement to have an asset management plan submitted to Eagle by December 1st of 2019. So we'll be finishing this up just in time. Although the plan is not completed, again, we have included some of the maintenance elements that came out of the plan in our fiscal year 20 budget by including $450,000 for cleaning and television of collection pipes. We are managing this 365 miles of collection pipes and more than 10,000 manholes with 9 staff members from Public Works with a budget of about $2.7 million. And this maintenance activity is funded via the sanitary sewer fund or the sewer rates. And again, another challenge you'll see is staffing level and resources. These photographs are indicative of the sanitary system. So on the upper left, you're going to see something that caused a backup in our system, which is like 300 feet, I believe, of rope that was clogged in the system. On the upper right is just a brick structure of the sanitary sewer, so that's an old structure. And those, are grouted and bricked, so those require some significant maintenance level.
And I'll comment, that's supposed to be a round.
Yeah. On the lower left, that is actually a picture from our IT pipes inspecting system that the sanitary crew uses with the sewer truck, so that's how they're inspecting pipe. They send a little robot down in there to take those pictures, and it sends it back to the fellows in the truck. This pipe is actually a clean pipe. What you see on the top there is just spider webs, I guess, I've been told. And then the far right, you see the Vector, and that's the piece of equipment they use to clean the pipes. So the wastewater treatment plant is up next. You may have noticed that they have just completed a 9-year, $150 million worth of capital investment at the wastewater treatment plant. So their asset management plan is lagging a little bit because they were installing all new assets. It made sense to redo their asset management plan based on their new infrastructure. Again, we have the deadline of December of this year, so we're moving that effort forward. It's included in our fiscal year 20 budget, and an RFP is under development. It is a regulatory requirement as a part of our NPDES permit. In addition to the plant itself, there's 8 lift stations that are maintained by the wastewater treatment plant, and actually we're currently repairing, I believe, 5 of the 8 of the lift stations currently, so that's a project that's ongoing currently. Wastewater treatment plant activities are funded via the sanitary sewer fund and sewer rates. They have an annual budget of approximately $15.3 million. Again, it's a 24/7 operation that we staff with about 36 FTEs. So we have staffing limitation. Regulatory changes are constantly a challenge that they face, as well as aging infrastructure. Here's some photos of the wastewater plant. On the upper left, you'll see an overview of the site and the newly constructed west plant. The top center is newly installed high-efficiency blowers, so we were able to incorporate some green elements in the project. The far right is the renovated east plant, so in addition to rebuilding the west plant, we renovated the east plant, and those are the aeration basins. Lower left is east plant sludge pumps, which are new and are more efficient. Lower center is the sampler room, which was part of the new project. And then the far lower right is an overview of the actual site, and you can actually see we're we're built out, and we are basically landlocked there with the railroad behind us and the river in front. So as I mentioned, the airport also has a pavement asset management plan, although not regulatory. Matt Kolhenek of our airport manager works with our engineering unit to develop an asset management plan. And he actually uses the resurfacing contract annually to perform some pavement repair. Although it's not regulatory, it's more of a safety issue. They have over, you can see 1,288,000 square feet of paved surface at the airport. And they fund that either with local airport funds, or they often get federal and state grants for larger projects. And then also, an in-house asset management plan was developed by IT and Finance, which covered city buildings like City Hall, the Justice Center, fire stations, and council passed the capital financing policy to fund those facilities, so that when infrastructure within those facilities comes up for replacement, we have the money to do that, avoiding spikes in general fund and operational funds for those capital investments. How do asset management plans inform our decisions? Again, we optimize our operations and maintenance efforts. Where should we be investing our dollars and our staff time? It allows us to strategically prioritize our investment, paint versus replace, or capital road maintenance as opposed to reconstruction. It determines necessary staffing levels and resources needed to meet those needs, and it formalizes a level of services and establishes performance metrics. So performance metrics are included in asset management plans, and they're established as part of that plan that allows us to report those things on a regular basis. Some of those from Stormwater and Sanitary were incorporated into the system's planning annual performance metrics in the budget process this year. So some of those would be improving condition assessments of both the storm and sanitary system, as well as the overall risk score, so reducing our risk for those systems. So we will be able to compare our marks to benchmarking other communities, and then just establishing an improving trend line there. So these are the asset groups that we don't have formal plans for. Not to imply that no work is occurring in these areas, but we don't have formal plans underway yet. For the signs within the city, they have been inventoried and they are all loaded in GIS. So we're working on the condition assessment portion of that project. The signals, again, that one is lagging a little bit. But we are working to get all of the signals in the GIS system. Dams, although we don't have an official plan, we do have an inspection cycle. And then sidewalks and active transportation, which includes our crosswalks, our RFBs, and our Hawks. Although we don't have a formal plan, we do have an inventory. They've worked on standardization of crosswalks, those type of things. Work is ongoing in those areas. So you should expect to see some results of those efforts. What are the next steps as far as asset management? So obviously, wastewater treatment plant needs to get rolling. They'll get their RFP out and hopefully have a plan under development shortly with a due date of December of this year. They've already completed steps 1 and 2, so it should go rather smoothly from here. We'll complete the sanitary collection and stormwater plans, and then we'll begin implementation of those plans in the operation and maintenance plan, and funding and execution in fiscal year 20's budget. We'll implement all the recommendations, establish rate structures to support those recommendations, get our capital investments in the CIP, and then establish and get underway the preventative maintenance program that is recommended in the plans. So that's all I have, unless you have some questions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there questions? Mr. Lazarus?
I'd just like to add that Mr. Delacorte and Mr. Smith and Parks Department is also working on the asset management plan for our parks assets. So, and I think we've got a grip on what they have. It's now developing the maintenance and repair schedule. and figuring out what that cost is.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These are just, I was just sort of putting down questions as I went through. Is it okay to just kind of ask them in order?
Sure.
Okay. The streetlight city ownership versus DTE ownership ratio, it's sort of like 1 to 2.1 or so. That's fairly consistent? How is it that they're on our streets, they're in our right-of-ways and so on, but we don't own them? I mean, like, is that percentage ever gonna change? I mean, as we add, like, when we add new ones, like when we redo streetscapes, then they become ours versus they were DTE? I'm just curious.
Well, excuse me. I'll start off with how we got there. The city was not in the streetlight business for decades. That was DTE's business. It was in the relatively recent past, late 70s, early 80s, that we started getting in the streetlight business. And when we do new subdivisions or new developments with public lights, they are ours. When we do redo or reconstruct Stadium Boulevard from 7th back over toward Pauline and Liberty, when we redid that, we converted those from DTE to our lights. So that's the direction we're going. Not all new lights will be ours. If we cannot provide a circuit of, I'm going to test my memory here, 10 or more lights at a time, they will stay on DTE.
So you mentioned, you said like when, like a new subdivision goes in, for example, like up in my neck of the woods, and they're putting in their own streetlights, but those are going to be city assets?
If they are public streets, they are our streetlights. If they are private streets, they are likely Detroit Edison lights.
How do we know the difference? Because I guess that's a question that was further down, but I'll ask it now. So when there is new construction and they add these miles of roads and the developer's paying for that, they're paying for their roads and their sidewalks and all that other stuff, I assume.
Correct?
But then we're taking on that's being added to our asset management costs moving forward?
Correct, if it is a public asset.
Okay, what's the difference? Like Howard, for example, this North Sky up on Pontiac Trails, are those public streets?
I believe those are public streets going
Are
in.
most new streets considered public streets in the city?
No.
Okay.
Some developments may choose to go the private street route. There are development reasons why they do that. They can have shorter front setbacks when that happens. They can generally get a little more denser development. The standard is different for building the street. It's not built to our standard.
And they're responsible for that maintenance in that
They're
case.
responsible in perpetuity for the maintenance.
Should I just go down my list? Is that all right? Okay. You mentioned that were regulatory components with some of these, like especially for water treatment plant and wastewater treatment plant. And I know, like the wastewater treatment, the MPDS permit, that's a standard kind of discharge permit, like anybody who discharges into public waters, correct? So,
It's more than just a discharge permit. As part of that, they are establishing a requirement for asset management. For years, we had an NPDES permit, but the permit didn't extend to the collection system. It is with the recent cycles of that permit, they're generally on a 5-year cycle, that they are extending permit conditions into the collection systems, requiring an asset management plan.
so I guess that gets to this broad question here that I had, that when we have some things that we're working on a plan, some things have sort of accepted the plan and are managing the plan. How is it that historically, we haven't always had, I can't understand why some aren't under asset management plans and some are like, it's just, this is like a new thing that cities do, or?
It's a different philosophy for managing. As municipalities, as a group nationally, we generally did a poor job of managing our plans. We tended to be on a basis of paying when you needed to deal with it and not planning for the future and making the depreciation and investments. For the water and sewer plans, you see those further along because those are enterprise funds and we're required to manage those as a business, doing depreciation, et cetera, as part of the funding cycle. All the other funds, we didn't have that, and it's a relatively new concept to be managing the asset with the thought of planning for the future replacements.
So certainly the advent of software has helped inventory and log the condition and plan out work. And you see a move in progressive cities more towards preventive maintenance and reliability-centered maintenance instead of waiting till something fails and then go out and fix it.
An example of being progressive, managing your street trees as an asset. It was within my time at the city that we started arguing and actually lobbying with finance to let us manage street trees as an asset. They're not still fully comfortable with it because most of the time you would depreciate an asset. When you plant a street tree, you hope it appreciates before it depreciates. So those are issues. Stormwater clearly is a newer, nationally a newer concept of managing your stormwater systems as an asset.
This is my last question. So you mentioned that the water treatment plant or process has about 2,200 assets, and there were 250 that were on the critical list.
Yes.
Could you give me an example of what those are, like, and what is on a critical list? You mean, you're talking about assets like a valve or a?
It can be something as small as a valve. It can be a part of one of the filters. It can be a pump,
Any
Right.
part of that delivery and treatment and delivery infrastructure?
yes.
What's the most critical one? I'm just curious.
I can't tell you off the top of my head.
I mean, it can't be too insanely critical, right? Or they'd be out there fixing it, right?
Well,
So-
understand, in both wastewater and water, we operate under the principle of redundancy. If there's a critical asset that is necessary for the operation of the system, you have at least two of them. Because at some time, one is going to break or need to be serviced. In fact, with water and wastewater, where we have multiple assets of the same type, let's say you have a pump room, and there are, for example, 4 pumps in the pump room. You are only allowed to take credit for the pumping capacity in the pump room with its largest pump out of service. When you plan, you just plan for that to happen, that you're going to have to take it out of service to repair it, service it. And so while it may be a critical asset, there's redundancy built into the system.
Well, thank you. That was very informative. I appreciate it.
Got Councilmember Lum, Rumlawi, and Ackerman. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Hupy and Ms. Prashant for tonight's review. I think maintaining our infrastructure is a fundamental responsibility of ours, staff and elected officials, and I appreciate having these reviews. They're always very informative and helpful, so thank you. Couple questions, and I appreciate, Mr. Lazarus, that you noted that, because on the city-owned facilities side, Parks and Rec facilities weren't listed, so thank you for noting that we're going to be using this asset management approach for parks-related assets. Couple questions. Again, for city-owned facilities and assets, in the fiscal year 20 budget, we added $300,000 in recurring new funding to a capital sinking fund. And I think that's prudent, but we really didn't discuss how the funding will be prioritized, the scope, and what major capital investments in city buildings, other than fire stations, are on the near to midterm horizon, 5 to 10 years. So I'm wondering, can you speak to that for city-owned facilities?
Not very well, because that group is managed by Matt Kalanick under John Fournier,
Okay.
so I don't know the details. But the plan will speak to that. That's what the plan is about, is as you make your investments, it tells you what are your,
Near
as
to
you save
mid.
the money, what are your first investments that you have to make.
what capital investments in the project. So I can follow up with, yeah.
Sure, and what we can do is, we've plotted out requirements versus funding levels, and I can send you that
Okay,
information.
that'd be great. Thanks.
Firehouses are, replacement though, are not part of that, they're funded separately, and that's why we set other monies aside.
Yeah.
And council set other monies
Well,
aside this year.
we've discussed that for the fire, yeah, stations, but not any of the other city facilities that I'm aware of. For the sewer system, the water slide mentioned the replacement of pipes. I'm wondering if we're going to be considering accelerating the replacement of sewer pipes, and if we aren't, should we be? I'm thinking about the recent pipe breaks and spillages and
The
blockages and all
recent
that.
the recent SSOs are not necessarily pipe breaks.
It's maintenance, a
It's
lot
a
of it.
maintenance issue. And generally, in the sanitary world, we don't replace pipes anymore. We usually go in, clean them vigorously, and then insert a new pipe inside the old pipe. It is more cost-effective, less disruptive to the community, and generally, we can restore the same capacity that we had beforehand.
So are we considering accelerating the installation of these interior linings?
We will follow the plan as it tells us that we need to do. If the plan says we need to accelerate, we'll accelerate.
Okay, because I do think, we're seeing more spillages, and, a couple of them
But
have,
as we are, I can't tell you what our plan is yet because we are still gathering the data, and that will inform our decision.
okay.
I think you'd admit, though, that as we do more inspection, we find all kinds of oddities that are in the sewer system that need to be
In
cleaned out.
any inspection of any system, we find oddities.
So I think we can tell you that we are doing more inspection and
Yes.
maintenance.
We are doing more, that's good. Bridges, unless I'm forgetting something, I don't think we've had any significant bridge reinvestments in the last, say, decade or so.
Yes, we have. Stadium bridges. That was a rather significant investment of 20-some million.
That's true.
Huron Parkway Bridge,
Well, that was 90s.
no, it was, if you'll remember, it was repainted not too long ago, within the last 10 years, I believe. It was repainted in the last 10 years.
Okay.
And that repainting turned into a major project, because when
Because
they
we
went to,
found, yeah,
when they went to sandblast the old paint off, the bolts came off the bridge. And so they had to replace
were out there
all the
painting.
bolts on that bridge while it stood standing. That was a significant effort.
okay. Are we looking at any other major bridge investments over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, the next one you will see is there is rehab work on is it the Railroad Bridge or the Fuller Bridge?
Fuller?
That, and then the wastewater treatment plant bridge is gonna have to have some investments done into it also.
I think you'll also see on the park side, the Gallup.
Yeah, the
Bridge.
pedestrian bridges will need work, and the there's two
Oh,
wooden
yeah.
bridges in the park
Heard from
system.
people about that, yeah. So that's on the near-term horizon then, okay. Pacer ratings, and the condition of roads. One of the budget questions I asked, it was indicated that we were planning on doing a ratings update
Yes,
this summer.
end of this
So
summer.
assuming that's still the plan, so it's going to happen, I was going to ask you when it was going to happen, end of the summer?
End of summer, early fall, they wait till the construction season is done.
Okay,
So I would say more the early fall portion.
okay, and when will the results be available?
Marty's telling
fall,
me the
sorry.
plan update is due to the state by the end of the year.
Okay, so the results, when will we get those results?
When we will probably be sharing them when the plan update is done.
So December,
At the end of the year, first part of the 20.
late December, early January? Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rumlowy.
Mayor, and thank you for staff bringing this together tonight. Like previous council members said, it's For me, it's interesting. It's the nuts and bolts, how the city operates, and what we hear from our constituents a lot of times are these things that were covered tonight. So it's good to know how it works so we can better understand it and explain it to our constituents. I was just surprised, and I know it's nothing that staff has done here, to not have a regulatory agency or rules to apply to stormwater. I was surprised to see that, I think, if I was reading that right.
Stormwater is relatively new to regulatory requirements. Prior to 1995, there were no stormwater requirements federally or at the state level. Ann Arbor was one of the first, I believe, 10 cities to be regulated under a federal stormwater permit in 95. That was called, we were called a Phase 1 community. That was as much about understanding water quality and stormwater. It was more about reporting what was happening in our city with stormwater, looking for heavy metals, et cetera, in the stormwater, not about regulating its condition. We are probably, I don't want to guess what percentage, but we are in the top few of the state that know our stormwater system. We can tell you where all our manholes are. We can tell you what the bottom of the manhole elevation is, what the top of the manhole elevation, sizes of the pipe. We know where all our inlets are. As of about 7 years ago, we couldn't have told you there was 35,000 inlets because we didn't know where they all were. It was a multi-year effort to go find them. And I expect in our next round of permitting from the state, they will start asking for a management plan. We will be ahead of the game because we have all the assets. A lot of the other communities are going to have to start going out to figure out what we have.
Well, I appreciate that. Glad we're ahead of the game, not playing catch-up. My question relates to the ponds or the basins that retain some of the stormwater and kind of the issues that we have with the maintenance of those. I noticed that the vast majority are privately owned. What are we doing to address that? How do we address it? Is there a plan to, so that, you know, when those things are not, well, when they're being obstructed, we have bigger problems?
We did a inventory of private ponds, and this is probably 15 years ago when we had done that inventory, because that question was asked. The vast majority of the ponds were actually in pretty good shape at that time, and we did do follow-up with those that weren't, usually the outlet structures were no longer functioning as they were intended to. It is difficult going forward. They're privately owned. They're usually under the responsibility of some sort of homeowners or property owners association. Most of the property owners have not a clue that they have some responsibility for the ponds. I believe we are undertaking another inventory to see where they are at. I suspect they'll be in worse condition than they were 15 years ago. And it will, assuredly will rise to the council's level as the pressure is brought to bear on property owners to maintain their ponds, which they didn't know they had.
But it's going to be more difficult because there's no regulation on them, and we can't refer to anything and say, well, here's a state law that requires.
No, the regulation resides here at the city. It is municipal regulations on them.
Okay, so that's something that we need to start thinking.
Yes.
All right, appreciate that. Couple other questions that have to deal with where we're at. One's with the urban forest and the management. We fell way behind for a few reasons, and we have a 10-year plan, second year of the 10-year plan. I get quite a few of those emails regarding dead trees, and staff has been helpful explaining to me who I go to figure out how to answer those for our residents. Where are we at in the 10-year process? Are we making good ground? Can we accelerate it? Can we make it 7 years instead of 10 years? Have we caught up from the Emerald Ash Borer? What's the progress report?
We are smack on schedule for the second year of the 10-year plan, so we are progressing as we had planned. To answer your question about the Emerald Ash Borer, no, we have not fully recovered yet. We still have a backlog of stumps, and there is a plan, I don't know how many years to get all our stumps out, but there is a plan to accelerate taking out stumps. If you had a desire to accelerate the plan faster for the remaining years, it is a matter of investment and requiring increasing the stormwater rates to do that.
Okay. And the other one would be about our progress on our roads. There was discussion last year that we were in jeopardy of failing to meet our initial projected targets. Where are we at with meeting 7 or better rating, within 7 years or 8 years, 6 years? I don't, the years go by fast. So how are we going to get there? Are we going to get there, let's say 5 to 7 years, 7 or better from now?
I agree with you. Time goes by fast. Seems to go by faster every year. I'm not going to answer that as to where we are. I'll be able to answer it after we do the next rating, and we have ratings across the whole systems, and we'll be able to look at how we are actually doing based upon the ratings by the independent rating agency. Right now, as much I would give you is guess by how much investment we're doing, but at the same time, I don't have a good handle at how fast we're deteriorating on other roads. So the true answer will come when we do the rating.
To your credit, though, we have launched a pretty aggressive capital maintenance program, which will, on one hand, you're juggling the roads that have already deteriorated. The other one, you want to make sure the investment you've made to keep the roads up has been protected. So you may not be doing as much repair work, but on the other hand, you're battling the forces of thermodynamics and keeping the roads from deteriorating. So it'll be.
I predict it will be close. I'm not going to say whether we're going to be ahead or behind, but it will be close.
One observation that I have with all this road work that's been going on is that when we do construction on some of these roads, the load on the surrounding roads is increased drastically, and those roads, go out twice as fast. They become in much worse condition, much quicker. And I just hope we take that into account. I'm sure it's already on your radar, but I want to go on record stating that fact that when we do road work, let's say on Pauline, and Liberty starts taking more of a load, and after a year or two of Pauline and Huron being worked on, Liberty is gotten far worse in the conditions, just as an example. So just putting that out there, that's what happens to these roads. I'm no expert, but definitely someone who uses them. Appreciate the explanations.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much. I think progress that's been made since 2014 is really exciting. The fact that we have these plans and we have metrics to grade ourselves is really, really critical when it comes to delivering on our infrastructure and basic services. And progress in the last 5 years has been exciting, so thank you. As we're working through, 4 systems with plans, 5 systems with plans pending, 4 systems without, I kind of understand the order in which we've been going, criticality and, community focus and attention.
And regulatory pressure.
And regulatory pressure, the guys in Lansing. For the ones for which we have no plan or focused effort, only one really threw up a flag, which was dams for me. So we have an inspection cycle, but without an asset management plan, what happens if that inspection cycle reveals a need for capital improvement?
It puts a pretty significant hit on the budget. We do have projections going forward as to what we believe we need for investment in those dams. We don't have a formal asset management plan for them, but understanding the two power dams go through a very rigorous inspection, and FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is the one who controls those dams. And out of those inspections come a maintenance plan, a maintenance capital reinvestment plan into the dams. The other two, Argo and Getty's, are managed by MDEQ, and they currently do not require an asset management plan for those dams. However, staff manages them very similarly because we are already doing it for the power dams, and we are projecting out 6 years and beyond for what our investments are going to be needed.
And we did put $583,000 aside in the FY20 budget to start building up the fund to address the general fund requirements for the dam repairs.
Thank you.
Councilmember Griswold.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
The question that everyone was asking, who's flushing 300 feet of rope down their toilet? What was that? I know it's on everyone's mind.
That was a maintenance operation that got away from the contractor.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for your patience, Councilmember Griswold.
Councilmember Griswold.
Thank you. We've been hearing in the news that some of the Detroit LED lights are failing prematurely. Do we have any lights from that company?
I am smiling. I was
Okay.
hoping somebody would ask that question.
Okay.
Heck, no. When we went into LEDs, one of our staff members by the name of Chuck Fochak, I'll give him his credits, he is on the Signs and Signals crew, looked at LEDs and what are their failure modes. LEDs, why people think of them as being relatively cool lights to operate, they hate heat. If they get warm, they're going to fail. Chuck recognized that very early on. He worked with people in the industry and said, we have a spec that says in the light fixture, the lamp in the light fixture has to be able to be in an environment, and I don't remember the numbers, but let's say for sake of argument, 90-degree environment. The lamp has to operate and rise no more than X number of degrees. And that was the standard we used. The industry, some of the suppliers hated us for that. One of the suppliers that hated us was the supplier of the Detroit lamps. And we ended up, I think we had only 3 vendors that could meet the standard. And because of that, we are having life expectancies on our lamps of about 20 years.
Oh, good.
And that is where the payback comes in LEDs. The payback does not come necessarily in the electrical savings. The payback comes in that you don't have to relamp every 4 to 5 years. So you're saving the labor of going up and changing bulbs. That's where the monetary savings is. And, yeah, I'm glad you asked.
Oh,
We had a staff member that saved us from that fate.
Thank you. And just one other question. On some of the slides, there was the phrase staffing limitations. And so the question is then, are there any risks that council should be aware of given we have staffing limitations?
Staffing limitations is there because if there always was more money, we could have more staff and operate at a higher level. If we feel there is a significant risk, we raise that issue. One of them that you will probably see in upcoming budgets is the signs and signals group. We will have to be coming back to add FTEs for that. As we add all the crosswalks, all the RRFBs, the audible crossing signals, et cetera, we are building up a need for performing maintenance on them. And we are analyzing that now, and probably in the next or the second budget cycle, we will be coming back looking for additional staffing for those areas. Well, when I say that, I'm speaking, we just did one. So either in 2021 or 2022, we'll be coming back with an FTE request. So that's my plug ahead of the budget cycle.
And given that I'm the pedestrian safety advocate, you have my vote.
I had a couple, 4 questions. Under the bridges category, there was mention of the DDA, and was that they help with the funding, or they are in charge of, there's some bridges, I wasn't sure which bridge was related to the DDA.
They may have pedestrian bridges that they're paying for. I know the U of M has a bridge that we do the inspections for them. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the DDA bridge would be.
Okay. And we were wondering if it was, if that would also be under railroad funding, possibly?
No, the railroad does not contribute to bridges.
Okay, okay. Where do bike lanes fall, under roads or sidewalk?
Currently under roads.
Okay. And if we think we know of a tree over on Barton Drive that has the green dot for removal, but it's all leafy and looking very much alive. And is there any cases like that where it could be marked for removal, but is still
Yes, they
alive?
could be. In one of my previous jobs within the city, I was responsible for checking all trees that were slated for removal, and I mean checking, not a forestry check, but following up to see why they were slated. Frequently, they will be structurally unsound, they'll have rotten wood in the middle, they're just waiting for the next big wind to cause them to split and come down. But if you have a specific location, you can email me and I will follow up with the forestry staff.
Okay, we might follow up on that. We just have to, thank you.
Yeah, but sometimes they look healthy and they aren't.
And just a last quick question, on the software that we use for different things, is there still like half staff discretion then to supplement the software, or do we just run with what the software tells us?
Oh, you always, the software, the output from the software is always the starting point to which you start making your decisions from.
Good. I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Councilmember Grant.
I wanted to go to your point about trouble finding contractors to actually do the work. How bad is it? What are we looking to going forward in terms of
It's mostly in the
future
road area
projects?
right now. Generally, if we can get our projects out early in the winter before spring, we can get better prices and have more competition for our projects because contractors are hungry. Right now, in the paving area, there's really only one performing contractor that can handle paving projects of our size. That is a difficult one because paving, they can't haul asphalt great distances. But we used to have 2 companies, Thompson McCulley and Cadillac, and now we have 1 company, Cadillac.
And when are we getting I saw some people out still cold patching some potholes. When is the sprayer, the pothole sprayer?
I don't know the answer to that, but we can get back to you with it.
Okay, they were patching some, I don't know, I was on my bike, so I was going by quickly. It
Yeah,
was with a
Right now,
shovel.
we're hot patching.
Yeah.
We're no longer cold patching with the plants up and running.
My
It was hot
apologies, I had no way to assess the temperatures. I was, yeah.
Oh, wait, I hope you did. But no, I'm just saying, so you
Yeah.
understand.
Good to know, yeah.
In May, we switch from cold patch
Good.
to hot patch as the plants come online.
But not the
Spray,
sprayer.
no,
thing.
I believe it will be after the budget year starts before we can purchase the equipment. It's in the budget for 2020, right? But we don't own it yet.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
One very quick.
Councilmember Long.
Thanks. Just a quick streetlight follow-up question. So, yeah, I know we've been in the practice of using LED lights, but at one point, we were also looking at smart streetlights. And I'm just wondering if that's something that we're still considering and what the state is of that technology.
The globe fixtures right now, my understanding, do not accept smart technology. Where we use other fixtures, we have them smart technology ready, plug-in ready when it comes.
So we are looking at it.
Oh, yes,
Because last
we-
year, there was a budget resolution to, right, allocate more money
But
for
I
streetlights
looked at
and to look
Marty
at
when
smart
to
streetlight
make sure
technology.
I stated that correctly.
You know, other communities are, going,
One of the things
using
that
this.
Mr. Shuchek is doing and the IT group is looking at how best for us to employ smart cities technology. And one of the things we've talked about are the smart streetlights.
yeah. Yeah, we talked about it some time ago, as part of the budget.
This is
Last
my-
year.
This is my own commentary on it. It's, as 5G is rolled out in the community, you're likely to see it happening because it will be a wireless technology. Right now, you would require a fiber optic cable to every streetlight, which is
For
extremely.
smart streetlights.
To be a smart streetlight, extremely expensive. So it will be a wireless solution when it comes.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thank you. You mentioned that the regulatory authority over stormwater, like these stormwater retention ponds on private property, is the city's sole responsibility?
Correct?
So we could examine that regulation for better outcomes to our stormwater
Well,
situation as a whole? Or
I say it as ours, but understand that we have done it in partnership with the county and the townships. And the logic behind that partnership is if one municipality or one entity gets ahead of the other entity and requires stricter stormwater requirements, it is likely to force the development out of the entity with the stricter stormwater requirements and into the entity with the more lax stormwater requirements. So as a region, we have been very much performing in lockstep, the city and the county and other entities, so that it's a neutral playing field for the developers. They don't have a reason to invest one place or another.
Sure, but does that apply to the extant infrastructure? Like we talked about these ponds that already exist and we have to ask them to inspect them and
Yeah,
so
we
are
will
we,
do the
are-
inspe-
does
we'll
the
do
county move forward as a whole with existing infrastructure also?
We will do the inspection ourselves. Generally, we do it and then go to them with what they need to do on their ponds.
Okay. Yeah, all right, thank you.
Councilor Reed.
Thank you. I want to thank you for the great presentation, both of you.
Thank Marty.
Yes. She did a wonderful
It's
job.
her group that does all the legwork on it.
This is very informative, and I'm really reassured that we're developing asset management plans for even the areas that we're not required to, and I really find that gratifying. And I think my colleagues have touched on most of my questions, but I get periodic calls about LED lights that are installed in residential neighborhoods that are just too bright? Who do we bring that to? Whose attention do we bring that
If
to?
you put it into an A2 fix-it ticket, we'll look at it and see if we can address it. Generally, it's done through shielding.
Thank you so much.
And generally, the LED lights are not brighter. It's a perception issue because of the temperature of the light. It's a whiter light and it's perceived as brighter. And we are looking at going forward with what they call warmer colors on their LEDs.
Well, just anecdotally, I have gone out and looked at the lights that are complained of, and on the same street, it is a warmer light sort of thing with conventional bulbs, but it really is overbearing and not very helpful.
I'm not denying that they
No, no,
are
I
perceiving it.
understand you are. Okay, thanks so much.
Councilor Rumlowy.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. You brought it up, the 5G technology. I'm not even sure where to go with this, but I have received some emails asking about its installation and its its perceived health risks with the improving technology. Where do we go with those type of questions? Who do we ask?
Well, that would be regulated by the, well, I'm not even sure I was going to answer it. I was going to say the Public Service Commission. The federal government has taken most of the regulatory authority away from the locals and in many cases from the state. To the point of if a cell company wants to locate in our right-of-way, we have very limited ability to say no. And in fact, we have to let them co-locate on our poles if at all possible. So our regulatory environment is going away from local control on that.
And what about any information regarding its health, public and safety?
I am stumped as to answering that one.
I believe from the very start of wireless technology, the feds have essentially said that under federal law, we can't consider health effects. Cannot. My understanding of the Telecommunications Acts.
It is very frustrating because we've essentially lost control of our local right-of-ways with telecommunications.
Councilor Hayner.
I want to follow up what Councilman Ali was asking, because I had it on my note and then I didn't ask it. So when you said 5G, my ears shot up because we have had people getting a hold of us. And I read a report where they said NOAA and NASA are asking the federal government to not roll out 5G because they said it's going to set back weather forecasting 30 years, just when we need it the most. And so I've read these things online about it and in reputable newspapers and science journals and things about 5G. And I understand that even that, I think it was in Grand Rapids, they have organized in Grand Rapids to try and stop the rollout of 5G in the city. And so it's one of these new tech concerns. There's multiple concerns. There's human health issues. There's insect population, pollinator, bird issues, and then there's this idea that it's messing with satellite imagery somehow. So I'm not sure how much of this is, for real or not, but it's a concern. So I think it's something that, as a body, we might want to look at. I know in a lot of places our hands are tied. We have no local control, but it's just apparently some cities, municipalities, and some states are trying to kind of wrestle that back over this issue.
Our legal staff and our staff have been following the federal regulations on the communications cellular. We are part of I believe, 2 consortiums that have opposed the regulation in the federal courts, and we have been totally unsuccessful.
It's also been part of the city's policy agenda to object to overriding of local control over our right-of-way, and that came up last year. I think those bills are still in the Energy Committee at the state level.
At the state, but I think the feds have preempted the state now.
I think the best thing, Mr. Fournier actually has a pretty good background on the whole issue, and I can ask him to send council a summary of what we know right now.
Councilor Ackerman?
Just to add, Councilmember Romlawi, we're similarly restricted in how much we can regulate telecommunications on private property. It's something we run into at Planning Commission, particularly with mobile telecommunication poles that go up around the stadium. We can help work with them on hours of operation, but at the end of the day, our hands are really tied as a local government as to whether or not they go in. So certainly telecommunication lobbies in DC are getting their money's worth.
Councilor Love?
No, I just, actually, looking up an email, we did receive an email. I sent it to you, Mr. Lazarus, and I've not heard back from anyone. I sent last week from a local software engineer asking about 5G technology. I also forwarded a couple questions about this to Spark and the U of M. And so it sounds like, and this person was reaching out as a software engineer and was bringing the public health concerns to our attention. So any information that can be provided us so we can circle back. It sounds like this is something we cannot regulate is what I'm hearing.
I read that email, and
Yeah.
to be honest, I didn't quite grasp all of what was in there the first time through it.
Okay,
So, but
I could resend it.
No, I
and-
have the email. I'm
Oh,
just saying,
okay.
I didn't understand everything that was in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, and I was just, because it sounds like it says, I mean, I don't know, obviously what the state of, this is way over my head, technology, this 5G technology universe is in our community. And this person who wrote to us said that they banned it in Brussels. And it sounds like other communities are also looking at this. So, yeah, I think any information that can be provided us, yeah, I don't know if there's anything to it or not, but the link that this person sent, you know, was pretty informative, and I know I forwarded that to you, so thanks.
I've got a couple of questions about, let's see, on the, our 80% figure with respect to roads at 7 or above, is that a center line, are we on center line or lane mile?
I don't know, but I think it's going
Eastern
to be,
Swallow or-
it's not going to matter. It's, because when they rate a section of road, they rate both sides, my understanding.
Ah, all right. Next, with respect to the wastewater, the waste pipes, rather than going through and redoing the pipes, we're putting internal liners on the pipes.
Generally, it's
And-
more cost-effective.
And you describe that as not having a capacity diminution element. How can that be?
Generally, an older pipe has got a rougher coefficient in the amount of fluid
does that
you
mean?
can.
It's a rougher pipe, there's more
It's a rougher
friction,
pipe wall.
slows down the flow.
And the amount of fluid you can put through the pipe is related to how smooth the wall is.
So the diameter of the pipe, part of the internal diameter may decrease, but the,
Slightly, it's usually a very small liner.
So
Oh,
to
is
give
that
you
right?
too much information.
please.
Wastewater doesn't flow under pressure, so it's governed by Manning's Law, where the roughness of the pipe is a major factor.
And the end coefficient.
Because if you pressurize sewer pipes, if you had a
And-
leak, you'd spray
Yeah,
the
things
stuff all
happen.
over.
So you can just say the pipe is slippier.
All right.
And the product goes through faster.
I think we're done here on that one, thank you. Let's see, about how many, on the urban forestry plan, understand that we're on a 10-year pruning cycle, and, you know, of course, Emerald Ash Borer continues to have lingering effects, as does, I suppose, the after effects of the recession even still. About how many trees are we putting in each year?
In excess of 1,000.
Okay, excellent.
And it depends, our goal is 1,000, but we've been hitting 1,100 or generally that amount each year.
Okay. I guess those are my particular questions. I just have one observation. Well, I have two observations. The first is that as I, calculate out, it looks like this is about a $75 million spend on our part. That is to say that the infrastructure areas identified in these plans and these proto plans hit about $73 $375 some odd million per year.
Yes,
And that's a substantial portion of our budget. And of those, roads take the lion's share.
yes.
So $32 million on roads. And I was surprised that, so much of our infrastructure spending goes to roads, which are obviously critical. Plays a different role of critical than clean water, wastewater, stormwater, and so forth. So I thought that was interesting and compelling. And finally, I guess I'd like to, echo what some of my colleagues have indicated, that I found this presentation particularly impressive. Obviously, with respect to the presentation itself, but all the more so of the care and thoroughness that it reflects that staff has been, how staff has been approaching these issues for years now. The notion that we know where every inlet is, where every pipe is, where every valve is, where every tree is, where every road,
And we could even say on the tree side, we can tell you where every available planting site is.
Absolutely, like up and down the line, like we have, the amount of data that we have is incredibly impressive. The care with which it's been gathered over the past couple of years is impressive. The fact that we have plans with respect to them is incredibly impressive. And, staff does great work up and down the line, and this just is a beautiful engineering example of it. So, there are only a couple of staff members in the room. You get a ton of thanks distributed widely to all concerned. Thank you.
And thank you for acknowledging that. And the thoroughness of the plans and the breadth of the plans represents the ownership that each employee feels in the system that they work on. That is what it's reflective of,
Yeah.
a real caring for the city's infrastructure.
Staff busts a gut every day on this, and it's, thinking through how complex the operation is and the history of how we got here, it's incredible. So, thank you.
I think I'd like to add, though, that, this council, other councils have recognized the importance of putting money aside and reserving funds for not only for the asset management, but a strong maintenance program. Municipalities run into trouble when they don't do that. And while we go through really a rigorous budget review every year, this is the result of council's supportive staff's effort as well. So I thank all of you equally.
Further questions? We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
I'll exercise my free speech and just say, we the North, go Toronto.
Thank you.
I had planned to come tonight and encourage you to remove the contaminated limestone from Argo and Longshore. While I am glad that that decision was made today, I remain concerned about the decisions which led to its repeated use over the past 2 weeks. I would like assurances that the health and safety of our neighborhood and its human and non-human inhabitants are the top priority of this lengthy and involved construction project. To that end, please ensure that the remediation of the limestone is handled by properly trained professionals in a manner which protects surrounding areas from further contamination. And finally, I would like to thank my council members, Ann Bannister and Jeff Hayner, for returning my calls and my emails and for their continued support. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Hayner. Discussion. All in favor? Oh, good Lord, people. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? We are adjourned.